Okay, so I just wanted to show you, this is the boards that I had taken. I had a bunch of 3/4 inch by 6 inch boards. They were true 3/4 by 6 random lengths. I ran them through the table saw, put these relief cuts in them so that any cupping or twisting would be reduced. Just about 1/8 of an inch, 3/16 deep. This is kind of a common practice for wider boards like this, and I just kind of evenly spaced those dado cuts in, and then I ran them through the router, and I have a tongue and groove bit so that they fit nicely. And then on this top joint, you'll see that there's actually that joint is not intended to be tight because they are on a barrel. So I just very lightly sanded with a 80 grit sandpaper block and just knocked off that corner so that joint would just be a very smooth or very small micro bevel, so that you'll always see that gap, but there's glue in this joint, and there's also wood glue going down to a 3/4 inch plywood subtop. And I actually screwed through into each of these flat sections to make sure that there would be no twisting or cupping, and that really has made it for a solid top. Okay, so at this point, my tabletop has been glued up, scribed around this column here. And I've got my barrel as a support. Underneath, I used a 3/4 inch plywood. And after tongue and grooving my boards, I'll show you what that would look like beforehand in just a minute. I routed this profile, so I just left enough so that I can add a detail afterward here. And it'll end up making this whole piece essentially look like one giant chunk of wood. So at this point, what I've done is I've cut 3 strips of wood, and the thickness here is about a little over 1/8. It's about 3/16 of an inch thick. By my final thickness, I want it to be 1 3/4 inches. So at this point, what I've done is I fastened this first piece on, glued it. Once the glue had dried, then I just went through and just added these crown staples just to make sure that it would stay on there until I can get my second layer and my third layer glued on there. The third layer, I will obviously not be adding any fasteners of any sort. It'll have to be a nice tight joint, so this I'm not worried about on my first and second layer, but on my third layer, that joint has to be nice and tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually test fit the piece, and it's going to be long for the second and the third layer, and then I'm going to pull it tight with a strap, and at that point I can mark it exactly, cut it with a chop saw or miter saw, and then it'll be ready for glue up. So I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, so I've got my second strip here. Again, this is long, and just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to actually soak it down with a rag on both sides, just compared to the water. That way, it adds a little bit of flexibility to my oak here, red oak. And this piece, like I said, is about 3/16 thick. And so I'm going to soak it down really good, make sure I rub it in to the wood grain. And at that point, I'm going to pull it tight around the outside of the table and strap it. So since I am a one-man crew here today, I'm going to use some clamps to help me out. So I'm going to approximate the center on this, and on here, and I'm going to put the bar right up to the the oak edging here. So now I can start to bend it around. And make sure I add a little tension here. I want to get it tight to the top here with the bar. It'll help keep it from having a place to go or slip out. And I got one more. One more clamp here. And I want to make sure that my joints are nowhere near the previous layers. Add more strength and rigidity to the top of the edge. It's going to be pretty thick, but that will help it to add some strength. Even though it's not technically necessary, it will just help out a little bit. So, now that in general place, just kind of slide that around a little. So that the joint is somewhere away from my other butt joint. So now I'm going to fish my old ratchet strap here through. And I've got the strap is undone right now so that I can slide it in between the layer of oak and the clamp. I'm going to pull it so that my ratchet is over here. So we're going to get this easy. And I'm trying to keep this thing fairly flat, which just makes it a little bit better. I do have to push to allow for some slack because that oak is springing tight against the bar of the clamps. And again, right now I don't have any glue. I'm just trying to pull this thing tight so that I can get an exact measurement or close to exact. Again, the second layer I'm not terribly worried if it's got a little gap, but I'm trying to prevent that if I can. Maintain some tension on my strap here, fish it through the ratchet, and I'll be in business. Okay, I'm just going to check it before I go too tight that it's not going to pop off. It has happened to me. So I'm going to pull this onto that joint here, where the one edge or one end of that strip is on top of the other. And make sure that those are as flat as possible. Got that tight up to that lip on my tabletop. And now, let's see, I got a little bit of space underneath here, so I'm going to try and factor for that. I'm going to take out about an extra 1/8 of an inch. That'll allow me to not be fighting the glue and having to take the piece off with the glue all covering it. So I'll cut that and then I'll show you after I put it on with some wood glue in between. Okay, so at this point I've got this thing glued and strapped, and I put a block of wood under my clamp here just to make sure I don't mess up my corner here at all, or more than I need to. And underneath you can see that it's fairly tight, the gap here. A couple of little gaps here and there, but nothing too bad. I can always fill that with some putty if necessary, but It is underneath, so I'm not terribly worried about it. And then when I get to the joint, because even with the ratchet strap pulled super tight, the joint has a tendency to flare out on the 2 points because it just has so much tension in it. So what I did is I put a block and a clamp here, and then I shimmed it opposite or opposing clamp, shimmed rather, and I whacked it in there nice and tight, and that pushes that joint very tight. So I have, it looks like about maybe a heavy 1/16 of an inch gap there. So it's getting closer and closer as I go along. Okay, so obviously I have removed the straps at this point, and what I did is I belt sanded the bands that were on the outside here flush with the top. I just ran the belt sander real quick around the outside so that it would be smooth, and I did end up having to trim the bottom so that it would flush up all of these. And then I ran the belt sander on that as well. So at this point, what I have done is I put some filler into, well, it looks like I still got some imperfections here from tear out and other things, which I'll have to tweak that with some wood putty. And excuse me, I ran a router around this edge. I did about 5 passes to make sure that I wouldn't have chip out. And then I ran a different profile on the bottom here, just a little round over. I think it's a 3/8, and it's got a little edge, so kind of adds a nice detail to it. So that's how you can make a round table edge.